Thank you for joining a weekly analysis of the Hamas-Israel war, Wednesdays at noon Eastern Time. We try and assemble the best analysts, scholars, rabbis, and diplomats from around the world to tackle different aspects of the war and its impact upon the region and the Jewish world. I'm Ken Stein, the president of the Center for Israel Education and Emory University emeritus professor of contemporary Middle Eastern history, political science, and Israel studies. Please note that our 19 prior webinars are archived on our website, israeled.org. There are audio and video versions of each of them. This idea for CIE's weekly webinar emerged from listener curiosity about causes and responses from what most have called the worst day in Israel's history of 75 years. Joining us will be Rabbi Yoni Wieder, the chief rabbi of Ireland and rabbi of the Dubin Hebrew Congregation, Rabbi Mario Karpuj, a Jerusalem resident who serves as the rabbi of Comunidad Masorti Bet-El in Madrid, and previously was a founding rabbi of Congregation Orthodox in Atlanta. Rabbi Yamin Benarroch, the Judaic studies principal for the elementary and high schools at Ecole Maimonide, and Rabbi at Beth Zion Congregation, both in Montreal, and longtime friend Rabbi Ed Feinstein, rabbi at Valley Beth Shalom in Encino, California, and lecturer at American Jewish University Ziegler Rabbinic School in Los Angeles. The Center for Israel Education was established in 2008 for reliable and timely information, content, and context that educators and students were craving. Over the years, we've been able to touch 3,500 teachers, rabbis, and perhaps 400,000 students. We constructed a special section on the website, Hamas-Israel War, multiple resources. The Center for Israel Education's work is focused on content, perspective, and sources, learning and teaching without polemics. And if you're benefiting from weekly webinars and the content on the website, please donate to our work. The donate button is on the homepage, israeled.org. How did the event of October 7th, where 1,200 Israelis and others were brutally killed, impact your Jewish community and attitudes toward Israel?
I would just begin by asking what happened on October 6th? What was the relationship between my community, California American Jewry, in its generational divides, in its diversity of commitments to Jewish life and to Israel? October 6th was a sense of Israel's best time. Israel was secure, it was powerful, Israel was prosperous, Israel had found a place in our lives. The question on October 6th was, what would be the fate of Israeli democracy? And what is the role of a diaspora community in that conversation? Many of us who had gone to spend time this last year or two in Israel were part of the demonstrations outside of the prime minister's office or outside of the Knesset or in Tel Aviv. And others were supporting the government and its endeavors to change and reshape Israeli politics. And the real question of the internal life of Israel was the question we held on October 6th. All of that went away on October 7th. It's remarkable how quickly that very passionate debate and argument went away on October 7th. And our community, I'm sure there's many communities around the country and around the world, were deeply shocked, deeply hurt, took this with great seriousness. The horror of October 7th, the horror of rape, of murder, of destruction, the sheer helplessness in the face of hostages being taken. It was, as has been noted across the world, a moment of medieval European Jewish life revisited. This was everything Zionism was supposed to take away from the world. Everything Zionism was supposed to protect us from. It was shock. It was shock at the horror of the event. There was shock at the lack of response, the ineptitude, as it were, the initial ineptitude of the military in Israel, in which we had so much faith. We had so much faith in the invincibility of Israeli military prowess and the invincibility of Israeli intelligence. Even the social response at first was so curious, like where was this country of caring? And then slowly watching the response. Our community rises up in protest, demands of our elected officials a very robust response. And the most wonderful thing was that for the first 3 or 4 days, we had the sympathy of the world. The prime ministers of France and England and all over the world, and the president of the United States coming to Israel. And then, of course, as Israel began to respond, the story changed. And we saw here in the States a very sharp rise in anti-Semitism. And of all places, anti-Semitism in the one place we would not have expected it. If we'd seen it on the right, we would have understood it. We saw guys marching with torches shouting, "Jews will not replace us." Anti-Semitism on the far right was expected, but it was anti-Semitism on the far left. It was anti-Semitism expressed in the vicious language of from the river to the sea on university campuses. Now, in America, about 90% of our kids go to university. The first thing that's whispered in your ear at your bris is your Hebrew name and what university you're going to go to. And the idea that university campuses, of all places, became dangerous for Jewish kids, this also inspired a tremendous rise in passion in our community and a tremendous response, trying to support kids on college campuses, protesting what was going on college campuses in our communities, reaching out to those who supported those colleges. And I'll go one more step to this. As we've now gone 140, 150 days into this crisis, into this catastrophe, there's now a very deep divide in the community because we still have a very emotional response of protecting Israel, passionately supporting Israel, and pushing back against this anti-Semitism. But very serious people are asking very serious questions now. What's the long-term strategy? What's the long-term vision? How is Israel going to coexist with a large Palestinian population? How is Israel going to find a place in the region? The president of the United States has put forth a sort of plan. You can read it in Thomas Friedman's columns in the New York Times, of accepting some sort of autonomy for the Palestinians in exchange for full acceptance by Saudi Arabia and the Muslim world. And so in our community now, in addition to that very passionate support for Israel, there is a very passionate and serious conversation going on about what can Israel do? What should Israel do? Is Israel right in pursuing this war? Should we go into Rafah? What are the civilian casualties? What is the morality of this war at this point in the way that it has been conducted and might yet be conducted? When this whole conversation began, I told my people, the moral intelligence involves holding two thoughts in your head at the same time. We can be passionately engaged with Israel, passionately supportive, emotionally connected to our family and our people in Israel. And at the same time, we can ask very serious moral questions, political questions, and strategic questions about Israel's policy, its future, its governing, its people, what our relationship is to Israel. And having those two thoughts, sometimes contradictory, often confusing, that's what this moment has raised in our community.
Similar to what Rabbi Feinstein was saying, we've got splits in our community as well, but they run down quite a different divide than what you were describing. So just to give a bit of background, the Dublin Jewish community, the indigenous Irish Jews living in Dublin, are a community that goes back many generations, a strongly but quietly Zionist community. And by and large, the indigenous Jewish population here in Dublin is an aging community, not so many youngsters. And then we've had, over the last 5 or 6 years, a big influx of Israeli families and Israeli young individuals coming to live in Dublin for work, for high-tech jobs, and for other reasons. And these Israelis have really become a very strong and integral part of our community. And a lot of the reaction to what happened on October 7th and in the past 4.5 months has been different between the indigenous Irish Jewish community and the Israelis. So just coming into shul the day of October 7th, finding out what was going on, and then particularly that night and the day after being Simchat Torah, the difference in responses and in how to proceed was very, very strong. For the Israelis, it was a given to them that we wouldn't be carrying on with any of the festivities or the celebrations as we would usually. People came to shul, they just wanted to see one another and connect, but there was no question we weren't going to carry on. And for the Irish Jewish community, they have a very strong connection and affiliation to Israel, but that same acute level of trauma and pain and intensity wasn't felt in the same way. That's been a similar story for the last 4.5 months. For the Irish Jewish community, the response has been a lot around the political climate here in Ireland, which has been very strongly pro-Palestinian. And the focus has been on what can we as a community do with that, and how do we respond and how do we react. Whereas for the Israelis living here, it really feels for them that they're going through it as if they're in Israel. A lot of them feel very guilty that they're not in Israel. We've had people flying back to go to Miluim, to serve in the army. And that obviously puts a burden on the community to look after the mothers and the wives and the young children that they've left behind, and a very intense trauma. For the Irish Jewish community, a lot of the debate and a lot of the discussion has been about how and to what extent should we be vocally and loudly supporting Israel. The mentality of a lot of the Irish Jews has always been to be very proudly Jewish, and that Judaism is a very strong identifying part of their personalities, of their identity, but it's always been quiet. You won't walk around and see many people wearing kippot in the street. You won't see Chanukias in the windows. You won't see sukkahs in the front yard. It's always been this very strong intuitive sense that we're in a host-dominant culture. We don't want to stick out too much. Now things are changing a little bit. Ireland is becoming slightly more multicultural, but this is the mentality of many of the Irish Jews living here. And there's this idea that if we come out too vocally and too loudly in our support of Israel, then we make ourselves into a target. And the reality is that those concerns are not unfounded. One of the girls that was taken hostage into Gaza was Emily Hand, a little Irish Israeli girl. Her father and her stepsister came to Ireland and they spoke to the community. And the father asked me, it's Emily's birthday coming up. Maybe you can do a celebration in the community and a birthday cake. And one of the kids can make a wish that next year Emily will be celebrating her birthday with her family. We set up a whole event and we did this in the local Irish Jewish school. And the backlash against that was huge. And the principal of the school, again, a Jewish school, didn't want videos and pictures going out of these Jewish kids in the Jewish Irish school celebrating Emily, who is an Irish Israeli girl, celebrating her birthday party, taken hostage. That was considered taking too much of a strong stance, and that there would be backlash against the Jewish community. So some people are very much advocating it's our responsibility and it's our duty now to support Israel strongly and to stand up against a lot of the rhetoric that's out there in the media and in the government. And other people feel that we need to have a strong divide between Judaism and Israel, and we can support Israel, but it needs to be quieter and it needs to be in a way that doesn't increase the possibility of anti-Semitism or doesn't question Irish Jews' affiliation to the country here. So that's one of the tensions that I've been dealing with and that our community has been thinking about a lot over the past few months.
I was here on October 7th. We made Aliyah a little over 3.5 years ago. We have been dreaming about this decision for decades. We visited often. We knew the place. We have our daughter here. We have family. We have friends. We have a synagogue here. We knew the place. And then we finally made Aliyah, and we couldn't find the place we have been dreaming about. We made Aliyah in the middle of Corona. So the country was closed. It was before there were vaccines. And it took close to 2 years just to get out of that situation, only to find ourselves in the middle of one election after the other, and then the reform in the judicial system that basically created all the protests Rabbi Feinstein was talking about. And there was a place in which we look at each other with my wife and we're like, where's the Israel we made Aliyah to? Where was the Israel we were dreaming about? We found that Israel on October 8th. Yes, the military failed us, the government failed us, but we found an incredible society that basically took the entire pain and the shock and moved immediately to action. The amount of people who, without being called, joined the army and went to their units, the people who were helping with food, with clothes, with everything to those who were going to the front and to those who had to leave their homes in the south because they were destroyed. So there was a sense of finally we found that society we always dreamt about and were so proud of, and that is an example to the entire Jewish people and the world. Nobody, even though they have been telling us from the very beginning that this will be a very long kind of operation, we were not, I think, really listening. We couldn't understand, we couldn't comprehend that this would be so long. We have been moving from that moment of shock, that moment of just being glued to the TVs, watching the news, to try to really find some kind of routine in the midst of this war that is still going on. To Rabbi Feinstein's question about why are we fighting this war, is because we have 134 people, brothers and sisters, who were sleeping in their homes on that morning of Simchat Torah and were taken, and they're still in Gaza. There is a very strong feeling that we cannot move on without having them back home. There's a clear difference between the views and the discussions we're having outside of Israel and in Israel. And I'm not talking about the right, who never wanted a Palestinian state. I'm talking about the people who are in the center and in the left, who the vast majority cannot think right now in any kind of autonomy or Palestinian state, because they say we cannot have in the West Bank what we had in Gaza. To find out that the vast majority of the people supported the October 7th pogrom, that many of the people who came into Israel by the thousands from Gaza were not Hamas people fighting, but people who just took the opportunity and came. And the people who were murdered, who were killed, who were burned, who were taken hostages, were mostly people from the left, the strong left of this country. So the survivors of that community, among them some of my most beloved cousins who live in Be'eri, look at themselves and look at the situation and said, how can we go back to our home? We're not assured that this cannot happen again. So that's from the Israeli side. I was here. I lead a congregation in Madrid, to which I go once a month. And the truth of the matter is that the first weeks after the war started, I was wondering, what should I do? Should I leave the country or not? It was a very difficult decision. My family supported me and actually pushed me to actually go, that it was important for my community there. And I did. Madrid, in particular, Spain in general, went through a very traumatic experience. Remember that most of the Jews in Spain are immigrants, Jews who came in the last 20 years. Mostly there are also those who came 40 and 50 years ago, but mostly in the last 20 years, they thought that they knew the society in which they lived, and suddenly they found a different place. We have in Madrid, in Spain, a very left-wing coalition. We didn't have, and we don't have, the huge rallies that we saw in London or in Paris. But in those much smaller rallies, you have the vice president of the country and ministers of the country. When there are protests in the university, there are only 50 or 70 or 100 people who are coming, but 25 or 30 are professors, kids who go to high school, and their teachers came with Free Palestine shirts to teach classes. So I would say that at the beginning, there was a lot of fear. As time has progressed, the news went from page 1 in the newspaper to page 3, to page 5, to page 7. It's still there, but a wider sense of normalcy and going back to life before October 7th is kind of coming. We're still very vocal about asking for the hostages and for Israel's right to defend itself. A lot of security in schools, and also a lot of anti-Semitism by the Jewish day school. You can find swastikas, or members of the community put posters with the hostages only to see them several hours later deface and erase, and we put again and take them again. So there's this kind of awful game about that, but trying to go on with their lives as proud Jews with the fears that entail. Nobody wants to go with a kippah on the streets. They're very proud of having their flags asking for the hostages inside the synagogue, but I think that they take them away once they leave the place.
Common denominator for the first three is a sense of vulnerability and feeling it on October 7th if they didn't feel it on October 6th.
Everything changed from October 6th. We had a ceasefire, and suddenly we came to October 7th. But for me, the different perspectives, I'm a school principal, but also a rabbi of a shul, of a synagogue, and there's a dichotomy of different age groups. In my school, I'm a principal of an elementary. Also, we have a high school. So different age groups, and how do we approach it with younger kids? How do we approach it with teenagers? And then we come to the synagogue and there are university students and adults. And how do we approach this? How do we deal with this? And so many different things came to mind: shock and horror, anger, such confusion, and so many questions. I was in Israel in the summer, and what I saw was a very divided country with protests everywhere. And I was in Israel 2 weeks ago for a wedding, and I found a very, very different Israel. Not that all those issues are not issues anymore. They are definitely issues, and they will resurface. But right now, everyone kind of has put all the differences on the back burner. There are questions, but unity has been a very, very important message. And that is the message to my congregation. It is the message that we try to give to the kids, the question of unity and who we are and our identity as a people. The words, Mi ke'amcha Yisrael, goy echad ba'aretz. We are a very unique people. We share common values and common destiny. And right now, unity has been the driving force in our community. But having said that, a lot has been going on. Right after October 7th, when we just all felt that sense of shock, and there was almost a sense of depression. We were all feeling so upset. And at the beginning, the first few days, it was so heartwarming because we were getting so much public support. And then suddenly the narrative started changing. I think it was 2 or 3 weeks after the war had broken out. We were in synagogue on Friday night, and there's a Belz Hasidic community in our area of Montreal. And a large group of Belzer Hasidim walked into the synagogue and said, "We would like to lead services this evening. Can we lead services?" And I said, "Of course, go ahead." And they did. And it was Carlbach and singing and dancing. And just a lot of people looked at me afterwards and said, "You know, Rabbi, that is what we needed right now. A sense of unity, but also a sense of we need to support each other." And that is something that we have felt very, very strongly. In school, it has been a little different because kids are different. Kids are very confused. They are not equipped to be able to answer and deal with a lot of the questions and a lot of the words that have been coming up: apartheid, genocide, open air prison. Kids, even teenagers, came up to me and said, "How do we respond to these things that are being said? From the river to the sea, how do we respond to all of this?" And it was a real sense of deep confusion for a lot of these kids. Our school, very Zionist school. Israel is very, very important. We teach Israel in our Jewish history program. Israel permeates throughout our school and even through our synagogue. We have Shinshinim in our school. We have Benot Sherut in our synagogue. But yet there was a tremendous confusion. We have looked at ourselves in the mirror and said to ourselves, we need to look at Israel education. And by the way, we have embarked with CIE on really redoing our entire curriculum and our entire Israel education. And this is something that we had embarked on even before October 7th. But the need for it is so pronounced right now, so pronounced. The need for good, solid Israel education where we can create resilient teenagers who know how to answer. I have university students who came to me and said, "We're afraid to go to school. We're afraid to go to our classes. We've asked the university if we can have online classes." One of the most common questions that I've been asked is, can I remove the mezuzah from my house? Am I allowed to do that? So there is a real sense of tremendous anxiety. Our community was attacked here in Montreal. There were 2 synagogues who were firebombed after October 7th. There were 2 schools who woke up to bullet holes in the windows on the front door of the school. And that created a tremendous amount of anxiety and panic, really a lot of fear. But for us, the most important thing was to build and strengthen our Israel education program. More awareness, posters of the hostages in the school. Of course, we have beefed up security in our school and in the synagogue and the entire community. That has been something that's important for teenagers. All they've ever been told is that the Israeli army, Tzahal, is the most ethical army in the world. And suddenly they're looking at the media reports and there may be a different viewpoint that's being shown. And then students suddenly start questioning. When you're 15, 16, 17-year-olds, that is extremely, extremely confusing. And how do we address that? How do we help them to deal with those feelings of anxiety and confusion and also their fear? Also, we had graffiti that was sprayed on our school, and we kind of felt it on a personal level as well. But I think that the message has been one of unity and strength. We have been saying Avinu Malkeinu. Since the war broke out, we have been saying Avinu Malkeinu twice a day. Every day in the morning and every day in the afternoon, we're saying Avinu Malkeinu, even on Shabbat. And I was asked many questions. Are we allowed to do this? Why are we still saying Avinu Malkeinu? And I said, look, as long as there is a war, as long as we are losing soldiers and the situation is the way it is, we should be saying Avinu Malkeinu. So the high holidays has kind of taken a certain meaning throughout the year. And I have to tell you that when I read some of those Avinu Malkeinus, they are so relevant, and will probably make our high holidays this year so much different and so much more meaningful in terms of when we think about the things that we have been saying.
In response to what Rabbi Feinstein was bringing up about the tensions within the community, from an emotional perspective, it's been very interesting to see that tension between the Israelis and the Irish Jews here. A very broad generalization, it tends to be that the Irish Jews are much more questioning about the number of civilian casualties in Gaza, whereas the Israelis, for me, I've had a really eye-opening experience speaking to a lot of the Israelis in this community, and Israelis that come from very left-wing backgrounds politically, very left-leaning backgrounds, the type of Israelis to always be advocating for peace. I've been saying in news interviews, reiterating the whole time how much pain the Jewish community feels for every innocent Palestinian life lost. And one lady came to me and she said, Rabbi, I don't feel that pain for the Palestinian innocent people that are lost. And this is not a hard right Israeli woman. This is somebody who's coming from a very liberal left-leaning background. And I said to her naively, why not? And she said, you just don't understand the amount of pain and trauma that I am feeling now myself. I'm so numb emotionally to feel anything else. She had brothers and nieces and nephews in the army, and other members of our community had aunts and uncles taken hostage into Gaza. And for me, I turned around to myself and I said, yeah, I should have seen that. The same way I wouldn't expect the Palestinians to feel bad at the moment for Israeli lives that have fallen. The immediate trauma that is being felt, it's not coming from a place of a lack of humanity. It's not coming from a place of not being able to recognize that there are human beings that are suffering here. It's just coming from the sheer intensity of the trauma that's being felt. And for me, that was, on an emotional level, very eye-opening to hear and see.
What practical responses do you think your community should be taking to address the emotional and the content gaps that presented themselves since October 7th? What would you like in 5 years, if you look back on these months, to say, our congregation did X because we wanted to accomplish Y?
I will confess that the answer I'm about to give to you is something that I've been arguing for before, but October 7th makes it especially acute. And that's simply this. In the American Jewish community, Israel is losing its kids. My children and my children's children are Israel's constituency here in America, and Israel has failed to connect with them. And every time that we Jewish leaders in the States have said this to educators, Hasbara leaders, foreign ministry leaders, Israeli leaders of all kinds, they tell us to shut up, they know better. And I'm going to be very crude about this because it's now acute. You have the statistical information about the polling among American young people and American Jewish young people and how different their attitudes toward Israel are than their parents and their grandparents. And for a generation, we have been begging Israeli Hasbara leaders and policy leaders and educators to just don't tell us, just come here and listen. Come here and listen to my kids. And when you go back to the Knesset, I've said this out loud to Knesset members, I recognize that your principal responsibility, your sacred responsibility, is to protect the state of Israel and its people. I get that. But when you're making those decisions, remember that my kids are part of your constituency. Because number one, they're going to be American voters. And that has a great deal to do with Israel's strategic position in the world, its military and foreign strategic position. And second of all, because it's the Jewish state and we have a stake in it. And it's not simply because our kids are assimilated. Yes, that's very true. And there is a drop off of identity. Yes, that's very true. And we did a great job teaching kids Tikkun Olam and Jewish universalism, and probably did a very terrible job teaching them Zionism and Jewish particularism, a love for the Jewish people along with Tikkun Olam. But the way to respond to that now, and particularly since October 7th, is to come and talk to us, listen to our kids, speak with us, engage us as a conversation, ask the question, what shall the relationship be? We are not galut, we are golah. We are far away from the center of Jewish life in Eretz Israel, but we are not in exile anymore because we can talk to each other in real time over Zoom. We can learn with each other, we can engage with each other, we can visit each other. That kind of conversation has to begin now in earnest.
He's right, I think, but I don't think that the fault is only on the Asbara people. I think that American educational system has failed our kids, and I was part of that for 20 years. It pains me to hear my colleagues speak about the feeling in their local communities and feel how far we're becoming apart. October 7th was a great moment of unity for the people living in Israel. It's becoming a moment of division between us in Israel and the Jews in the Golah. I never understood a verse in the book of Shmot as I did after October 7th. After the 10th plague, Pharaoh walks up in the middle of the night and he hears a great cry all over the land of Egypt. And the text says, because there is not a house in which there is not a dead person. That's how we feel now here. There's not a single person in Israel who doesn't know a family who was affected, who had a kid who was kidnapped, who has a kid who was killed, who had a member of the family who is kidnapped. There's not a single one. We go to 2 or 3 funerals a week in the neighborhood. We receive an email or a WhatsApp. Somebody, a soldier died in the neighborhood. We all go there to the front of the house. We sing a tikva when the family is coming up with flags. We hug the family. We accompany them. We don't have time right now to think about some of the other bigger issues. We're in the middle of a war that is not just like another war. With all the failures of the army on October 7th, if not for the heroic acts of many people, many people, they could have come to Beersheba, and they have maps of the bases in the center of the country. They're here to try to kill us. On October 7th, I was already at Shul. When the alarms started to come to Jerusalem, 3 times I had to go into buildings to protect myself from missiles that were trying to kill me. It's not a metaphor. That's exactly what they were trying to do. So there is something about that. The great poet Chaim Guri, in I think his last book, wrote an amazing poem in which he said, people ask me, Ma shlomi, how I am doing. And he said, I am doing like my people. My people here in Israel is not doing well. We're trying to cope with this, but we have been hurt, we have been killed, we have been murdered, we have been raped. We were totally surprised by it. We're still in shock. And right now we're trying to defend ourselves because these people there are trying really, if they get their way, to kill us. As somebody said, the only difference between these people and the Nazis is their capabilities, nothing else. So when I hear youth going into Congress to protest not in my name, I wonder if their parents and grandparents during World War II would have thought to do something like that during the attacks of the American army to Europe. If they have signed petitions to say humanitarian aid for the victims in Germany. There is something about this idea of Israel has to be perfect in any way. We don't look at the same way here. During the 20 years that I was there, that we were having wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, and I didn't see the protests there to think about the humanitarian aid for the Iraqis who were suffering. Suddenly, with Israel is different. I feel that the different bars in which we're measured are very troubling. We're literally defending our homes. We're literally defending our homes from people who want to come and murder us with no questions.
I'm going to answer this one more from a school principal perspective and reiterate something that I said earlier, and that is what we need to do is strengthen Israel education in our schools. And I think that's where we have failed in many, many ways. That is something where the Jewish educational system in the diaspora has failed. And I'll say it this way. If you would have asked me, what is Israel education like in your school? I would say it's amazing. We have a tremendous celebration on Yom HaAtzmaut. Our Shinshinim have a Yom HaZikaron assembly. We have flags in our school. There are so many things that we do. We teach about Israel in our school. But then when we started reflecting and we started looking at what is it that we really do, and starting to ask ourselves many different questions. When do we teach Israel in our school? Where? Who teaches it? This is one of the things that we are grappling with now. We're asking the question now. Tal from the CIE is helping us, and we're asking those questions. Is it just something that is reserved for the Judaic Studies department and the Judaic Studies teacher? Or is it something that really permeates throughout the building, throughout the school? Is it taught in science class when they're doing some kind of an environmental project and look at an innovation from Israel? So we're asking ourselves all these different kinds of questions. And the basic thing was just for us to come up with a mission and a vision statement of where we see ourselves as a school and teaching Israel in our community. And that has been an eye-opener. We took administrators, myself and another administrator, and then we took general studies teachers, Judaic studies teachers, elementary teachers, high school teachers, and created this committee where we have been asking these questions and trying to define for ourselves what is it that we want to do. And I think the problem is that, yes, we're all teaching and feeling and experiencing Israel in our communities and in our schools, but it's all over the place.
There used to be a Wendy's commercial. Where's the beef? It speaks to what have we not done to inculcate our kids to understand that Israel is part of their identity, and they need to know our story and they need to belong to it. They can criticize it. They need to spread it. But I'm not convinced that missions and trips to Israel are the only way you do it.
There's a responsibility on the part of Israel to connect youth in the diaspora to Israel in a more meaningful way. But I think the responsibility on us is how we bring Israel to the youth.
Sure.
It's not just about gung ho, raise the flag, wave the flag, let's go to a rally. But then when they start asking you the questions of Gaza is an open-air prison and you have no idea what to say and what to answer, and then you become so confused, that creates a disconnect. And that's where we have the responsibility to be able to educate properly. Resiliency is a very important word that I use, and I think that's the key of what we need to do.
Mario said it. We're very resilient. We're running into this fire. We're taking responsibility onto our own shoulders. Our civic engagement is quite pronounced. And if the government doesn't do it, we'll do it. We'll volunteer to do it. We'll engage our communities to do it. And that says a lot about Jews from around the world who have gone to Israel in the last 2 or 3 months and put their hand up and said, let me go down to Shokedah, not too far from the Gaza border. Let me make some omelets for the soldiers. Let's do the really tachlitic thing. Let's do the basics. A year ago, the year started with an amazing expectation of Israel at 75. And it ended with trauma, something totally unexpected. And I would argue if we thought we were normalized in a Jewish state, and we thought our normalization had also carried over to the non-Jewish world in Western democracies, what we found was that wasn't exactly the case. We found that there were those who were putting their own hands up and saying, maybe we don't accept you and belonging to this Jewish state. As leaders in the Jewish community, what do we do about that?
I really think what a lot of the adults in my community have realized is that they need to be more vocal. They've got very used to being, as I said before, quietly, proudly, but quietly Zionistic. And it was kind of all meshed up together in the same way. No one really challenges you on religion, and we're Jewish and we live in a predominantly Catholic country, and that's all fine, and everyone's accepting and open of that. It kind of became the same outlook when it came to Israel. This is the team we're rooting for. This is the team we support. Everyone else here in Ireland is on the Palestinian side and we're on the Israeli side. And that's just kind of a historical fact. And we don't question it and we don't put ourselves out there, because you wouldn't walk into the opposition's fan base and start taking off your jersey with the colors of the other side. And that approach might have worked for however many years. And if you're asking in what way for us has October 7th been a turning point, I think the penny has started to drop for a lot of people that at this point in history, that's not going to go anymore. We can't just stay quiet and not be vocal. And the amount of people that have come to me and said, people at work are asking me these questions and I know the answers and I've heard them, I just can't articulate them. And I think that's a really good step. There's this desire out there for education when it comes to Israel advocacy and just some of the basic points. We're not talking about anything radical, but again, when the starting discussion here in Ireland is such a strongly pro-Palestinian rhetoric, and when the politicians and media here speak in a way that all Israel is out to do in this war is to kill as many innocent Palestinians as possible, which is the way they're portraying it, it's just going against that rhetoric. And again, it's easy in a way to get people to come to rallies and to wave flags, and it's easy to get a big turnout at a Yom Ha'atzmaut event, or we hosted this last week, the Israeli ambassador in the shul, and huge turnout for that, and people are willing to do it. The number of times I've had radio or television programs contact me and they said, we want to speak to a lay Jewish person in the community just to hear how the war is affecting them and to hear their perspectives. And suddenly people become very quiet and they're very anxious and nervous. They don't want to put themselves out there because it is going into the lines then. But that realization is really coming, that now is the time that we do need to go out there and be a little bit more vocal and educate ourselves as to how to articulate our beliefs coherently to the outside world.
If Israel comes out of this with an alliance with Saudi Arabia, acceptance among the Muslim world, and becomes part of that Sunni arc as opposed to Iran, this could be a turning point in Israel's history. I think Israel's internal sense of itself has reawakened, as the wonderful colleagues have talked about. The fact that so many people came back to fight in Miluim, 130% recruitment, plus all of the social services provided by the population. There's a reawakening of Israelness within Israel. And with our population, I've seen again and again and again, people have suddenly rediscovered that they are part of the Jewish people. And that Jewish people is vulnerable, and that Jewish people requires something. And what's beautiful, those beautiful people that came by and said, I left Hebrew school when I was 11, 12, 13 years old. I want to learn. I want to be part of my people again. It has reawakened something within the soul of American Jewry. Now, certainly American politics are a god-awful mess. And this is only going to make it more complicated because the American Jewish community finds itself politically homeless. It's no longer on the side of the left, can't be on the side of the right. We don't know where we are. But beyond that, within the community itself, there is a reawakening of Jewish peoplehood and belonging and a desire to become literate in Jewish peoplehood. And that could spell a real revolution in the way that we think about ourselves.
I hope you're right, Ed.
I think that there is an amazing opportunity here. I think that part of the problem is that we have been hurt by our success. Most of the Jewish community of today don't remember 73, didn't experience 67, don't ever believe a day in which there was a question about if this country will exist or not. The first weeks of the war, the people who came, left everything and came here for 2, 3 weeks, a month to work and help in the farms, people mostly from ages 50 to 70, who left everything and came here. I was helping some of them, and I took this woman who was organizing this group of volunteers to see a farmer. And I explained to the farmer what they were doing there, and he said, wow, this is so amazing. It's not obvious at all. Zelo muvan me'elav. It's not obvious at all that you're here. And she looked at him back and said, it's so obvious. that we are here. Of course we are here. That's what we have to teach the new generations, that it's obvious the connection we have one with other, that our destinies are together and are intertwined, and that we have the same destiny. We have the same past, we have the same future, but we also have to have the same present.